Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I love collecting old worn out jeans. They're so much fun to sew with. And when I think about comfortable jeans, I think about nice soft flannel. I have a great project where we can repurpose our jeans and some old flannel sheets and make a quilt. For this project, we're going to be using the legs of the jeans. I do like to take the seams apart. It gives me a little bit more fabric, but I also like the wear look on the ends. I take the one seam apart, but I leave one together. That way I can open it up flat and use it all as one piece of fabric. So this will sometimes show up in the center of some pieces. We're going to start with some very basic 8-inch squares. We're also going to need some triangles, and these are going to be setting triangles that are going to go around the outside. We need 4 for the corners. My 4 corners started off at 7-inch squares, cut in half from corner to corner. I did a paper template with that 7-inch square cut in half because I was able to get this piece into some little corners of the jeans versus having to cut that big square. I also will need 16 larger triangles, and this is going to be for the sides. This is a 9-inch square cut in half on the diagonal. I also made a paper template and was able to put this in areas where a big 9-inch square would not normally fit. And I need 16 of the larger triangles. The total amount of denim you're going to need is 2.5 yards. So if you want to buy denim, you can do that too. The back of the quilt is going to have some flannel on it. Old flannel sheets work great. The total flannel you're going to need is also going to be about 2.5 yards. So a king size sheet, even a queen size sheet would work, or you can just buy some flannel. The quilt is going to be made using a regular sewing machine and a serger. If you don't have a serger, you still can use the regular machine. And because we're sewing with strong denim, I would recommend putting a denim needle in both your sewing machine and the serger. I'm going to use an assortment of thread colors in the serger. I'm going to put a gray and a blue in the loopers. And for the needles, I'm going to use a gold and a red. Often you'll see stitching done in jeans in gold. You can also see it in red. I think it's just going to add a little bit of color. Additional to the denim, I'm going to have some fabric right in the center of the squares. Now this is an old charm pack that I've had for quite a long time. I don't think it's available anymore, but you can use any 5-inch squares, even if you just cut them up from old fabric, old shirts, even the old flannel sheets can be cut and used. I'm going to use 41 of these squares. Before I do any stitching, I make sure that all of my fabric is pressed so that it remains that 8-inch square throughout the whole project. We're going to make little quilt sandwiches. I have the 5-inch squares that are going to fit right in the center, and the flannel is going to go on the back. So we have a 5-inch square, an 8-inch square of denim, and an 8-inch square of the flannel. Make sure the flannel is right side down. I'm going to use the same thread as I'm going to use in the serger. And this thread is called Primo Soft. It's from Filtech. It's 100% polyester, so it's good and strong, but it looks like cotton and it really feels like cotton. And I'm going to put this both in the top needle and in my bobbin. And I'm not going to do any measuring at all. I'm just going to bring this to the machine and stitch. I'm going to use the edge of my sewing machine foot as a guide and stitch around. And then I'm going to just put an X in the center so that all 3 layers are together. I'll have a square and an X along the back. We now have 41 of these quilt squares done. Little piece of fabric in the center, and the flannel on the back is stitched on because of this square. So it's more like a quilt as you go. The quilt is going to be somewhere around a 53-inch square. The quilt is going to be made by triangles. We're going to have 2 triangles with a joining piece in the center. The 2 sides are going to be exactly the same with 1 joining piece in the center. So what we do is we make 2 of these corners And those corners are going to get stitched right onto that center row. That's going to make our square. To make the two corners, they're going to be stitched together in rows, but the rows are going to go on a horizontal. We start with 1 square, 3 squares, 5 squares, 7 squares, and then this is the joining piece with 9 squares. Each of these rows need to have a triangle on the end in order for it to make one big triangle. Let's lay it out in the fabric now. And I'm going to start and put right up at the top. The next row is going to need 3 blocks. The next row is going to have 5 blocks. The next row, 7. These 4 rows make that piece of the triangle. The last row is going to be that joining row. And I'm going to keep my 9 blocks aside until I finish these 2 corners. To make this a triangle, we need to fill in these corners with triangles. The very top needs to come to a point, and that is a corner triangle. To fill in these corners, we have those bigger triangles that we started at 9 inches and cut in half. And those quarter triangles will fit up here. And as you fill in those corners, you now see that triangular shape. Each one of these squares are already quilted and ready to go. So we'll need to put some flannel on the back of these setting triangles. To put that flannel on the back, we're just going to have 2 sizes the same. We're going to have the wrong sides touching and just stitch all the way around that triangle, just to hold those 2 layers together so that you can work with them. Each of the triangles are made just a little bit big, so we're going to be able to trim them off after. So each of your setting triangles need to have the flannel on the back. I do like to lay it out first and work on 1 row at a time. So I'm going to start with this top row. I'm making both the halves at the same time, so each of these will be piles of 2. Normally when we quilt, we put the right sides together and stitch. But in this case, we're going to put the wrong sides together. So both of those flannels will be touching. This means that the seams are going to be shown on the top side, which will leave the back a nice clean finish. We're going to be able to go to the serger and stitch these together. If you don't have a serger, you can use a sewing machine, do a straight row of stitching and then a zigzag to hold them together. We do have that seam that the serger or the sewing machine did. The side triangles now need to be stitched on. Before we do that, we just need to trim off any of the little dog ears on the corners. To match up this triangle onto this square, you won't need to worry about this top piece. You're just going to need to match it up to this bottom edge. And that will go for both sides. We're going to take those seams and put them so that the backing is together, matching up that seam and stitch right down. We will be able to trim those triangles down after. We can work on the next row. We have 3 blocks that need to be sewn together and the 2 triangle pieces. We're going to continue the same theme and put the wrong sides together so that seam allowance is up at the top. So the 3 blocks together and the 2 corner triangles are going to match along that straight edge. The last row you did will have these dog ears poking out. We're going to be able to just trim those off. Using that edge, trim off that little point. The triangles on the outside are a little bit bigger, so they're not going to match up. Match up the back edges and stitch. We now have a larger triangle. We're going to be able to do the next row in the same way. Sew the squares together, sew the triangles onto the end, and then match up the rows. We have a total of 4 of these rows that need to be sewn together. And as each row goes on, this triangle is going to get bigger. We now have those 2 big triangular corners done. We won't need to quilt this at all because the flannel will have a nice finish on the back. We need to do that 1 more row to join these 2 triangles together. It's going to consist of 9 blocks And on the end, we have the smaller triangles. With this last long row done, match up the seams and stitch them together. With that centerpiece stitched on, the quilt is done. We just need to trim it. We started with 2 big triangles and we added that centerpiece on. That centerpiece now became an end. This was the corner of the triangle we started, and this is the corner of that centerpiece. So the quilt is now a great big square. We need to even off all of these edges. For us to square this off, we need to give it a little bit of a pressing. And don't worry about what direction those center seams are going to go in. They will go in the direction they want to go in. And just give it a bit of a press so that we can straighten up these edges. What we want it to do is lay as flat as it can so that we can trim off the extra. I don't want the flannel and the denim to be separated, so I'm going to draw a cutting line and stitch it first. So draw a line all the way around the quilt. Once your line is drawn, go to the machine and stitch about 1/8 of an inch from that line going into the quilt. If you want, you can just use that line and do a row of stitching with the serger. And that serger is going to finish those edges and cut off all of that extra. However, for myself, I would like it to still feel and look more like a quilt. So I'm going to take and put a binding on it. That will help protect the edges and give me that quilt feeling. I'm going to distress some of these patches because I want them to look like an old pair of jeans with patches on them. And because the edges of this little piece of fabric is not finished, I'm going to be able to pull off some of the threads around the outside. So when it's washed, it's going to give it a nice frayed look. I'm going to distress it even more. I'm going to put some holes in my patches. I want to just put a little cut in this top fabric. I don't want to cut the denim nor the flannel. So lift up the fabric and just get a little seam ripper in and make a little hole. When this washes, it's going to fray. You won't need a lot, just a couple here and there, just so it gives it that worn, distressed look. It's better just to do a little bit at a time, and as the washings go by, you can add more if you feel that you want more of a distressed look. Now we can put it in the wash machine and the dryer. And I've washed this with a couple of pairs of jeans because I want it roughed up and the jeans are going to help that. So I do have some lovely distressed holes throughout the quilt. Some are big and some are small. And because all of those raw edges are on the front of the quilt, the back has a nice clean finish. And with all that distressing and the raw seams in the top, it really has that old comfy look. And even though this is put together with 2 big triangles, it does equal a square, and it puts all the squares on an angle. It's a fun quilt to make, and it's a great way to use up your denim. I do hope you give it a try. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.